Hello everyone, my name is Mr. Benoit the Librarian, and today we're going to be talking about copyright rules and requirements. So these are laws that we need to look out for when we are taking material and putting it into our research and presentations for class. Now, the first thing we need to determine is what is copyright. Now, the simple definition, it literally means to copy someone else's work. So we need to keep an eye out for the copyright symbol, this little C with the circle around it. Anytime you see that, you need to get permission and cite the material that you are using so that way you are not breaking any rules. So as you can see, I have a little picture that I got from Flickr that is a copyright symbol with puzzle pieces, but it is a Creative Commons image. So I was allowed to use it, but I had to add an in citation for it. But the complex definition is copyright is a type of intellectual property that protects original works of authorship as soon as an author fixes the work in a tangible form. So what are some of these tangible forms, these types of copyrighted work? So we have things like paintings and plays and sound recordings. We have things that we're going to use quite a bit like illustrations, books, and photographs that we're putting in our presentations and into our research papers. We also have things like blog posts, architectural works, movies, computer programs, musical compositions, and poems. All of these fall under certain copyright rules and regulations, which we're going to talk about today. So one of these, let's say rules, let's talk about audio and music for an example. Some things that we are permitted copying of music includes for academic use other than performances, you may make copies of up to 10% of a musical work. You can also have single copies of a recording may be used for rehearsal purposes or evaluation. And you can also use single copies of a recording of copyrighted music may be made from a recording owned by a school or teacher for the purpose of constructing oral exercises or assessments. So as long as you buy it originally, you can then use it in certain ways. But there are ways that you're not allowed to use this music and audio. So the following are not allowed. Compiling a collection of recordings. So back in the Napster days when you were just taking music from the musicians and compiling your own, CDs, this is actually illegal now and you aren't allowed to do it. You are also not allowed to make copies of printed music scores or make an arrangement of a copyrighted musical work without permission of a copyright holder. So those musicals that are performed by theater departments have to get permission and pay money to the copyright holder before they can do the performance. You are also not allowed to perform a musical work publicly without the copyright owner's permission or copy music from a website. So you need to make sure that you're following these rules so you aren't breaking any copyright laws. However, there are some ways that we can work with the laws, such as something called fair use. Now, fair use allows us to use certain material as long as we're still following a certain criteria. So U.S. copyright law says that brief excerpts of copyright materials may, under certain circumstances, be quoted verbatim for purposes such as criticism, news reporting, teaching, and research without the need for permission from our payment to the copyright holder. So if we're using it for educational purposes, there are some ways that we can fall under the fair use policy. So here's some basic criteria for determining what is fair use. Number one, the purpose and character of the use. Using a copyrighted work for an educational objective is more likely to be considered fair use than using for commercial gain or entertainment. So you may be able to use it for school and educational purposes, but you can't make money off of it and entertain people using it. Two, nature of the copyrighted work. If the work is for general readership, such as a magazine or periodical not specifically designed for education, it would tend to support fair use. Three, the amount and substantial of the portion used in relation to the copyrighted work as a whole. So if you're only using a smaller amount of the total work, it's more likely to be considered fair use than using a larger portion. And finally, the effect of the use on the potential market for our value of the copyrighted work. So use that negatively affects the potential sales of the original work weighs against fair use. So you cannot affect the profit being made by that person. It would not fall under fair use. So here's a little more of a simplified version. Based on the following criteria, fair use is possible if The nature of the work is general, and the audience is predominantly the educational community. The character of use is nonprofit. The amount of the copies is minimal, and there is no intent to replace the original, only to make it more useful in conjunction with the copyrighted words. Next, we're going to look at the permissible amounts for fair use. So here are some different materials that you can use. If you are following the certain requirements, it would fall under fair use. So text materials, things you're finding online, things that you're finding in books. You can only use up to 10% of the total, or 1,000 words, whichever is less. Motion pictures, movie clips, or TV clips, only up to 10% of the total, are 3 minutes, whichever is less. We talked about music lyrics or music videos, but think of it this way: up to 10% of the work, but not more than 30 seconds of the music or lyrics from an individual musical work. Illustrations and photographs, no more than 5 images from one artist or photographer, or no more than 10% or 15 images from a collection, whichever is less. And finally, numerical data sets. So these are things you're finding in databases. Up to 10% or 2,500 fields or cells from a copyrighted database or data table, whichever is less. Next, we're going to talk about copyright infringement. Copyright infringement is violating the intellectual property rights of a copyright holder. So you're copying the work illegally, you're not getting permission, you're performing the work in public, you're distributing the work to the public by sales or other methods, so you cannot make money off of somebody else's intellectual property rights. And finally, you cannot adapt, transform, translate, or create other works from the original one. So you can't take something like Harry Potter and make your own version of it without getting copyright permission first. That is still falls under the copyright laws. Next, we're going to talk about something that is specifically important to all of you, which is plagiarism. So this is using someone else's work and putting it in your papers and research and presentations without putting quotations or proper citations for it. So first, the definition of plagiarism is to steal or pass off the idea or words of another as your own. Next is to use another's production without crediting the source. So you have to make sure you're putting quotes and citing it in your reference page. Next is to commit literary theft. So literally taking someone else's ideas and using it as your own. Or to present as new and original an idea or product derived from an existing source. So you can't take someone else's idea and create it on your own. There are multiple types of plagiarism that you can fall under. First is direct plagiarism. These are word-for-word transcription of a section of someone else's work without attribution or quotation marks. So I'm taking something directly from a book or an online source and putting it in my own research paper without putting quotation marks around it and giving attribution to the author. Next is self-plagiarism. Students submit their own previous work or mixes part of their previous works without permission. So you're taking a paper from another year and using it again. I'm taking sections from another class's paper that I used and putting it somewhere else. You are only allowed to do this if you get permission from the teacher. Next is mosaic plagiarism. This is where we're borrowing phrases from a source without using quotation marks, or we're substituting synonyms in place of the author's words. So we have to make sure that we're putting quotation marks, and we can't just change the words a little bit and make it our own. We have to still make sure that it is quoted directly, or we're making sure that we are summarizing and paraphrasing by still giving attribution to the author. And finally, sometimes we just fall into accidental plagiarism. This is where we neglect to cite our sources or unintentionally paraphrase a source by using similar words without giving credit or attribution. So sometimes we just forget to do it, or we're trying to get away with it without adding quotation marks and attribution. That's still plagiarism. You're still taking someone else's work. So what are the symbols that we need to look out for when we are looking for what is copyrighted and what isn't? First, we have traditional copyright symbol, which we have already talked about a little bit, the circle with a C with a circle around it. This is where works cannot be used, adapted, copied, or published without the creator's permission. All original work is protected under copyright when it is created. Next, we have public domain, though. This term public domain refers to creative materials that are not protected by intellectual property laws, such as copyright, trademark, or patent laws. The public actually owns these works, not an individual or artist. So therefore, anyone can use public domain works without obtaining permission, but no one ever really owns it. So works can be used, adapted, copied, and published completely without restrictions. There are no permissions needed, and works, think of it this way, works published prior to 1923, the 100-year rule, works by long-dead creators, and works that creators have placed in the public domain already on sites like Creative Commons, which we'll talk about in a second. When we're using Creative Commons and other sites that are showing attribution, we need to make sure that we're looking for the symbol that has a little, it's a person with a circle around it, says by. Others can copy, distribute, display, perform, and remix your work if they credit your name as requested by you. So you're allowed to use it, but you have to give attribution. Next is the no derivative works. Others can only copy, distribute, display, or perform verbatim copies of your work. And finally, we have share alike. Others can distribute your work only under a license identical to the one that you have chosen. And then non-commercial. Others can copy, distribute, display, perform, or remix your work, but for non-commercial purposes only. So we're going to use what we like to think of as Creative Commons to find images and sources that we can use in our research and in our presentations. Creative Commons works may be used without permission, but only under these certain circumstances like we just talked about. Creators set rules for the way their work is used, and you only work that creators have chosen to designate as Creative Commons. So we can use sites like Openverse and look for open source material that is designated Creative Commons and follow the same rules and laws that we talked about in searching using certain criteria. So you could use filters to search based on the copyright criteria, find images that you can use for presentations, and make sure to give credit to your author that it requires attribution. We could also use sites like Flickr Creative Commons, another way to search for images using Creative Commons license laws. So why is it so important? Well, we need to cite to avoid copyright infringement and plagiarism. So anytime you have books, magazines, journals, websites, newspapers, data articles, and other things, we need to make sure that we're citing properly in order to follow all these rules. So to avoid plagiarism, add citations. Citations allow researchers to properly quote the works of others, acknowledge where the information is from, respect the intellectual property rights. So citing studies and data properly allows you to provide evidence for key points of research. It helps direct the reader to original sources where they can find more detailed information about the points that you cited and the subject matter. So citations are important to avoid plagiarism and unethical claims to what you haven't discovered or contributed, to respect intellectual property rights, to provide evidence, and to help the reader trace and track down the sources of your information. So here's some basic citation elements that you could use to avoid copyright infringement and plagiarism. Locate and cite the following information: authors, titles, source name, editors, volume and edition, date or year of publication, page number, city and country, publisher or university, URL for online sources, DOI, which is the digital object identifier, and the retrieval date for your online sources. So here's a simple example of citing images accessed online. For online images, include the name of the site you found it on and the URL. Link directly to the image where possible, as it may be hard to locate from other information given. So here's APA style. That's the style we're going to use. The last name, the initials and year, the image title or the format. So was it a painting? Was it a picture? Where did you find it? The site name or museum, the location where it's found, and the URL. So those are all things that we need to use to follow our citation rules when we are looking for making sure we're following copyright laws. So look for images in the Creative Commons that you can use for your presentations, and make sure that you're citing accurately. Thanks so much for listening. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. And finally, like we should all do, add your references to the end of your presentations. So therefore, I'm following all of the copyright laws.